show you how to solder and things that I want you to know for your test. First of all, what you need to do is you need to cut out all of your metal pieces, right? And you need to sand and file them, sorry. So just so that you know for your test, what I also want you to know are your certain tools, your basic tools that you're using. So a jeweler's saw, how to use it. You know, the blade goes down and out. It's for making tight curves and cutting out fine pieces of metal, small pieces of metal. That's what it's for. And then your bench pin, right, with a bench clamp here. So this is because you can have big pieces of metal and it's flat, right? And then you have this smaller area with pressure, so you can cut smaller pieces because the V forms pressure on the clamp, on the metal, sorry. Keeps tension on it, right? So then you have this little piece of copper, and you'll notice that I sanded it, right? It's nice and shiny. So I sanded it, filed it. You want everything kind of just exactly how you want, because once you solder it, if you didn't file down an edge, well, now it's attached to another piece of metal and you can't. When you sand it, it doesn't have to be going all through your grits. You are just sanding it to clean it. So it can be like a 320 or something like that would be just fine. You also want it to be nice and clean. So when you sand it, that's what helps keep it nice and clean, is that you're sanding off all that dirt. Now, if you sanded it and then you came back the next day, it might have oxidized a little bit, or a week or something like that, so you might want to wash it off or re-sand it, but whatever it is, you want nice clean metal, okay? So I'll go over that, my pieces, how my setup in a little bit, but I want to talk about the torch and safety with it. So basically, hair back, right? Hair up, glasses, and nothing hanging. So I might even want to take this off. So no sleeves or anything like that. You don't want your hair hanging into the torch. That's extremely bad. I'm sure this is fine. I mean, it is fine, but you do have fire, right? You want to make sure. And I know there's a little bit of lag, but it might be able to help you with hearing what I'm saying before you see it, right? Okay, so this is the torch. Flint striker, okay? So the flint striker obviously has flint in it. You make sure that you can see the flint before you start, because sometimes you're trying to light it and there's no flint, and you know, this just comes out. Okay, so your torch, remember, you want to just turn it on just a little bit. So this is an oxyacetylene tank, and this is a fine torch head. It's specific for jewelers soldering because it has a precise nozzle and you can adjust the flame better, and you can get different torch heads, but this is a more fine tip. Okay, so when you turn it on, you just want a little bit of gas, not a lot, okay? So just so you can barely hear it. And before you turn on gas, you would clearly want to make sure that the vent is on. I had already turned on the vent, so it's a nice ventilated area. And you'd also want to check to make sure that there's nothing flammable surrounding you. I am just going to demo how to do the torch, and then I'll move away some of the stuff because I need to talk about it later, but I'm just going to hold it here so it's not, I know I'm not going to light anything on fire here. Okay, so just barely on, and then what I do, and then you're gonna look for glare. But see how that's kind of hard? Like, I'm not getting the pressure. You have to do like a snap, right? Right, like that. Okay, so that pop is normal, okay? So don't worry about it, especially when you're in the beginning and you have just a little bit of gas, your flame isn't gonna go crazy. So, okay, but you guys have a hard time doing that. So what I recommend doing is you actually use the surface area, that hard surface that you're working on, you know? So, you probably can't see that. And I hold it on here so you have pressure, and then light it, so that way, you know, you have the tension, okay? And then, once again, that pop is normal, okay? Because it's an oxyacetylene exchange, so the oxygen and the gas together is what's causing that pop. It's the lack of oxygen, or the added oxygen, right? It can blow out your flame. That's why if you turn it on too high, it can blow it out. So, yeah. Anyway, that's the torch. You're also going to fire, like, under the bottom, okay? and on the top, so you're putting your work on this tripod. And I do have other things here like fireproof brick and stuff. These are helpful sometimes if you're doing smaller pieces, so you can, you know, arrange those. They don't have to stay under here. And I have a couple different types. I have a third arm assist if you're trying to solder a ring or you need to hold something in the air. This is super handy for that. Flux. I have two different types of flux. So remember, you use flux to help your solder flow and keep your metal clean. So there's a couple different things, right? So I have the spray flux is very nice. It works really well. I actually really like this. But when you're first learning, I recommend that you try the Handy Flux. So this is a Handy Flux, and it's a paste flux. So basically you paint it on your metal. And the reason why I recommend this if you're just learning is because it helps keep your solder kind of in place. It stays, like, it's thicker, right? So it stays liquid longer, and your pieces they kind of help stay in place for you, like a glue, okay? So I recommend when you're first learning, you use this. Flux is a chemical. It is, if it gets in a cut or something like that, it can burn your cuts, but it's not, you know, just wash your hands when you're done. Try not to get it in cuts. Okay. Tweezers. Tweezers are extremely helpful for soldering because I keep the solder in this little jar. And so if you see a piece of wire in there, that is solder. And that is an easy solder. If you need a different type of solder, you need to let me know. But easy means that it fires at a very low temperature. So it fires at a low temperature, so you don't have to heat up your metal quite as much, and the solder will melt. So it's easier for you guys to solder. So this is a wire solder, and you cut it into little pieces to make your own chip solder, okay? So I keep scissors here, the wire, right? And you're just going to cut random pieces into the jar, okay? Right on top like that, so that you're not flying solder everywhere. And then what I do is then cut a bunch. You know, if you need 5 different solder pieces, cut 10, right? So then you can go through and pick which ones were bigger or smaller that's going to fit better for your piece. Okay, so that's what I suggest. And then just to go through the steps, you're going to heat your metal. Okay, when I turn on the torch, it's kind of loud, so it's hard to hear. So you're going to heat your metal from the bottom, and then you're going to heat it on the top. Okay, so I heat it from the bottom so that it pretty much, the hotter you get your metal, the more fire scale you get on it. And so it's easier if you have the fire scale on the back of your piece than on the top of your piece. Where the solder will flow, where the metal gets hot. So usually your metal has a bigger piece on the bottom, and you're adding smaller pieces on the top. So the smaller pieces are going to heat up way faster. So you want the bigger metal on the bottom. You're heating it from the bottom more. And then you're going to go to the top where it'll draw that up. The heat will draw up the solder into those small pieces, because those small pieces are going to heat way faster. So it's way more time on the bottom, heating up the bigger pieces of metal, and then less time on the top, so that those smaller ones will just solder right to your bigger piece of metal. Okay, now when you're done with that, you're going to take your metal. Okay, it's going to be very hot, and this is all very hot, so don't be touching this stuff when you get in here, because someone might have just used it and this is hot and you don't know that. So always check it. So pick up your metal. You're going to quench it. Okay, here, I'll just grab I happen to have one right here. So you're going to pick up your metal, and then you're going to quench it in the water. And I know you can't see the water here, but it's right there. And basically that's so it cools it right away. And the reason I do that is so you can touch it right away, right? And it helps bring the metal back to its original state. Also, part of annealing is where you're heating your metal. And then, so quenching, the other thing about it is when you put your metal into the water, if you didn't solder right, it'll fall apart on you. So that's another good sign. You know right away you got to go right back at it. If that happens to you, you have to go through the whole process of the sanding it and cleaning it. You cannot solder dirty metal. Very important. Okay, so this metal right here is not nice and shiny. I didn't sand that you're going to have a hard time soldering and getting the solder to stick to that. Okay, so after that, you're pretty much done and we can move on. But let's go through the process here. So the only other thing I didn't talk about is this flux, okay? So flux, when you put flux on, like I said, I recommend the paste, is you're going to flux all your metal, okay? Now, in theory, you wouldn't have to flux all your metal. The solder goes where the flux is. The flux helps the solder flow. But the solder also goes where the heat goes, and it wants to stick to the metal. So in theory, you could only have to flux the area you're going to solder, but flux the whole thing, okay? Front side, back side, all your pieces, because it's going to help keep your metal clean also. And it helps determine how hot your metal is getting and when your solder is actually flowing. So the flux changes colors. It starts at kind of this white, pasty, clear color, and then as it heats, it gets really white because all the water is evaporating for it and it's leaving behind a powder. As you heat it more, that powder will start to melt. It'll be turned clear because now the chemical is reacting, right? So it'll turn clear. And as it turns clear, that's how you know, for the most part, your metal is hot enough that the solder melted. Okay. The other reason, this is why I use round solder, is because you're cutting it so it's a round piece, right? So if you have one metal on a round piece and another metal on top, you're going to have a little bit of gap in there, right? Well, when the solder melts, it flattens. So you can see your piece flatten. And that's another reason I use it, is so for beginners, you know when you're done. The minute your pieces flatten, you're done. The solder melted, okay? Now, if we're working bigger, you might have other issues and you probably need some help. It's not a very big space, so really you're on your own, but if you have a piece that's kind of complicated, just let me know. Sometimes I need to help you, like pull the piece down, okay? So what also helps is that as the metal gets hot, it also wants to warp. So sometimes your pieces aren't going to stick because they're going to warp on you. And so it helps to have another person in there that knows what they're doing so they can quick get in there right when it's at the perfect heat and flatten it for you and it'll solder. So, like I said, just let me know. My demo, I'm doing a pretty complicated piece, so I'm going to show you that. Okay, so as you can see, this piece, I am doing the Birth of Venus, and I decided to make this difficult so that, you know, hey, why not, right? I drew this and then shrunk it down and then put my design on the paper, right, as you can see. And then this is how I'm going to lay it out. Okay, so this is kind of tricky. So I have a couple different types of solders going on. I have a butt solder right here, where the two pieces are lined up and they're not overlapping each other. That's a hard solder to do. I don't recommend that solder, so especially when you're first learning. But you can see that I have metal on top of this metal, also connecting it, so it's going to be fine. I'll just stick a little solder in there, and that's all going to join. So as long as your metal is overlapping. Now you'll notice that I have multiple layers going on. I got 1, 2, 3 layers going on. So what's happening is that it's causing a lip in there. So you can see, because this is 1 layer, 2 layer, 3rd layer, I'm going to have a little gap in there. That's okay. I'm not worried about that. But it gets to be an issue up here. I got 1, 2, 3 with this top layer. So now that is floating. That's a floating piece, right? I'm going to actually tuck that. Oh, I have that on wrong too. Sorry. There we go. That's better. So I'm actually going to tuck that piece inside of there to kind of help aid in that. Or what I could do is kind of get another little solder piece and another metal piece in here to kind of help support that. Now, as you can see, and then I would have another butt solder right there. Or butt joint, whatever you want to call it. So this is my tricky part. So if I was soldering this not as a beginning, I don't recommend doing this as a beginning. I would not solder this way. I would not just do couple solders and go for it all in one shot. I would solder these pieces together first, just these, and then I would add those. I would add that third layer with a second solder. It's way harder. It's a little harder. It's not way harder, but it's just a little bit more work because you got to go clean and sand. But so for you guys, I don't recommend doing something quite this complicated, but we can. I mean, that's what I'm going to do. We're going to do it all at once, so it'll be fine. Okay, so let's start with the flux. Okay, and I would obviously, I'm going to move this piece of paper. I don't want that there with a torch, you know. But this flux will stay a little bit, even if it dries, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's going to dry when you heat it, you know. And it's actually a little bit better if it does dry, just because sometimes it can bubble on you. That's another issue it can cause. You guys get frustrated where your pieces move around because it's bubbling. If it starts to bubble, turn off your torch immediately so that you can fix it and then go right back at it. Okay, so I fluxed both pieces, front and back. I fluxed all the pieces. And then remember, I'm putting my base piece first. Now, there's a different little trick, like this piece. This piece was a little hard, right? Like I said, that's when it's going to give me some problems. I might actually want to solder that solder on there first so it doesn't move around on me. So I might want to take the piece of solder like that. Okay, so I know, well, I gotta flip it over. So this piece, I want solder in there, right? A couple different pieces. So it makes it kind of hard. And this is a big piece of solder. I would not normally use that much solder, but because I'm going to add this piece later and I need multiple spots of solder, I'm going to go with a couple of bigger pieces. Less solder is better than too much. So I'm going to solder that piece separately. So I'm going to set that to the side. I'll just kind of show you that in a minute. Where I'm going to add those, I'm going to add that piece on separate. Okay, but back to soldering. Sorry, I'm talking too much. Okay, so I'm going to notice I put that piece right there. So I'm going to solder that one separately on the fire brick, and then we'll place it up there. But until then, my neck piece was my bottom piece, so I'm going to put that on there. Once again, check the screen, make sure it's not hot. Okay, so in other words, the test questions that I wanted you to know, less solder is better than more. You don't want to have to sand your solder off. You don't want to see the solder. Nobody wants to see solder, okay? That's bad. So that's why I said less is better than more. You see how I'm like balancing that, trying to be really careful there, right? And I only put one little piece of solder under the neck, and that was kind of a bigger piece, but you're not going to see that. Okay, this was also a base piece because I had a butt solder going on, so I'm going to put that there. And I'm just going to join that to it because remember I got this hair on top that is going to join it, and I just want a little tiny piece of solder now because that was just a little a little joint. Okay. And I want to make sure you're seeing that. So I feel like you can see it. I don't know. We'll see, I guess. Okay, so then I'm going to put that hair on there. Oh, and the hair overlaps onto the face, so I need another little piece of solder. Try to arrange that all right. Like I said, this is a tricky way of doing this. Oh, and then the hair comes down into there. So do another one. Whoop. Fell off. So that's why I said sometimes this paste solder is nice because it helps keep the solder there for a little bit. That's way too big. I don't want it. So then I can place this on. I don't remember how my hair is. Hold on. I think it's like this. And then this piece is really little. I would probably do the same thing if I wasn't doing this. Trying to show off a little. I would probably solder this separately. This. I suppose I could. Why don't I do that? All right, because I don't want solder spill, so I need solder in here, and I need solder in the face. Okay, so I'm gonna solder that separately. Also. Okay. And then right here. So. This is a little extra work for me. This is like one more step because I have to sand it, but that's okay. That's what jewelry is all about. It's all about like showing that level of difficulty and showing that you took the time to make something unique and not easy. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so these little pieces, I'm going to melt these pieces and it'll just kind of draw the solder. So you're not heating from the bottom though, but it's the way you turn the torch. So when you heat your torch tip, okay, remember the hottest part of a flame is in the tip of the cone, right? The tip of the cone. So you aim that tip of the cone. When I'm soldering like this, I'm going to aim it kind of at the base, actually, because I don't want the heat to go directly on top. Like, I'm not going to aim it directly at the solder because I want the solder to melt to the base of the piece, and I want to kind of draw the solder. I don't want to, if I just heat it right at the solder, it's going to ball up and like not stick. So, and then it's going to get dirty, and then the metal's going to get dirty, and then it's not going to stick. I have problems. So you're heating the base of the metal first. The solder is made of just a cheap metal. It's like a whole bunch of alloys in there. So if cheap metal melts at a super low flame. So if you're just heating up the solder and not the metal, well, the solder is not going to stick. They have to be equal temperatures to get it to stick. Okay? All right, let's go through this. Okay, so, I mean, I could turn that up, especially because I want some more heat, like, at the base. But this is a pretty good fire brick, too, so it should help distribute my heat. All right, that's probably good. So, man, that is hot. I haven't used this fire brick before, so it's totally getting a little black. I don't know about this. That might be more of a kiln brick. Let me move this. That doesn't seem right. Okay. It works on this one, and I know, and it also works on the table. This is all fireproof. Okay, so you'll notice when I'm doing this too, it burns off the flux. That's why you need to be in a ventilated area. If you hear this, I don't know if you can hear that, you are suffocating the flame. So I'm pointing it more at the bottom, and it's a hot flame. You know, it won't take long. Like, there you go, it already melted. And this is a tiny little piece. That was quick. So the heat carries. So I usually direct the flame so it goes like up it, you know, so I'll like point it up, right? Like if I know I have to solder other stuff on here, see that balled on top, but didn't quite, there we go. There, melted, okay? Hard to see because I had fire in the way, but you can tell now, I'm gonna quench this super fast. You can tell that that balled up on top, right? And it's stuck to the metal, but that, see that fire scale? That's bad. I need to sand that all off. So, okay, quenched it. All right, so same kind of thing. You got some fire scale. So when I go and clean these pieces back up, just to save me a little bit of time, I mostly focus on the back and cleaning that so that the solder will stick. So now, when I go to solder, I have like a nice clean, I would have a nice flat, like those are already on there, and all that solder is not going to move around on me, right? So I'm going to set that aside though. I'm not going to go through this step because you don't need to see that. But you should be able to see this step a little bit better because this is a bigger piece of metal. That's what I'm hoping. Anyway, okay, let's get that directly on there. Okay, all right, that's probably pretty good. You should be able to see that pretty good. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to heat this up. I'm going to turn on the torch, and okay, so see how that piece is kind of gapping? That's what I'm talking about. That's where it's sometimes nice to have a third person come in there and kind of push on it, but it'll be fine. I'm not third person, so. Okay, so you're going to heat it. So it's already turned pretty white. If I wasn't taking my time with this, that would start to maybe bubble up. And then make sure that screen's kind of in the middle. There we go. All right. So I'm going to heat in a circular motion. I'm trying to heat the metal evenly. And I'm not doing this, right? That's suffocating it. You want to back up that cone. Okay, so see how it's already starting to turn clear in one of those spots? I know that that's getting more heat. So I need to concentrate my heat over here. More in the center. There we go. Okay, see how it's starting to turn clear? When it turns clear, you actually want to come to the top. So I gotta redistribute that heat. It's not quite yet. There we go, now it's getting there. I'm gonna come to the top. Circular motion still, but mostly focusing on those areas you wanted to solder. There we go. You see it? Boom, done. And it flattened. I'm going to quench it. Here's the true test. Did it actually melt? Did it actually stick? Did I actually heat both pieces equally? Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? Okay, so you can see that got a little fire scale on there. So now I need to sand that off. But this is a good solder. That's great. Okay. I next need to take this, okay, and I need to actually, you should sand it, okay? You go back through your grits, 320, well, 220, 300, 400, 600, steel wool, all the way up, okay? But I do let you guys cheat a little bit here. I have like a pickle that will remove it, but I don't have a pickle. If I had a pickle, you would totally use pickle. This is an acid. Pickle's an acid too, but this is a different acid, and sometimes it's not so great on your metal, okay? So notice the sign, okay? It says poison, keep hands covered, or keep it covered, wash hands, right? Very important. This is a pool chlorine, but it's concentrated. It's bad for you, right? So you want to take the copper tongs. Remember, copper tongs are only for the acid, okay? Because it doesn't ruin the solution. This is a copper solution. Oh, see, it's bubbling right away. This is actually, I kind of shake it around. You don't want to let it just sit there. It can pit. So, if it doesn't come off right away, you can let it sit there. But don't just let it sit there. Like, you got to check it, you know? Okay, so anyway, that's why I keep this over here by my solder station, because it is, it is ventilated, okay? So then when you're done here, okay, so keep it covered, you can check on it every once in a while. You really don't want to leave it, like this solution's a really strong solution. You don't want to leave it in there longer than like 5 minutes. That would be bad, because it's going to start to eat away your metal. You can already tell that that's cleaning it up pretty darn good. I would take that out. It's got a little bit of residue on it. That's just a residue. So when you put it in the copper, in the acid, it's not supposed to come out shiny. That's not the goal. This is perfect. It took off the fire scale. It didn't pit my metal. I could go sand this now. This is just water. Rinse it, right? Okay. So this acid is a good acid. It's muriatic acid. It's a pool chlorine, and you mix muriatic acid with hydrogen peroxide and, well, a little bit of water, but anyway. Then what happens is that you dissolve copper in the solution to make the acid react. It's the combination of the copper, the acid, and oxygen that continues this acid throughout its lifetime. So I never have to throw this away. It's super nice. So basically, this, when it doesn't react, it turns a brown color. And all I have to do is add a little oxygen to it, hydrogen peroxide, right? A little oxygen. Add that to it, and then it refreshes it and turns it this bright green. This is the perfect color you want for etching. And this is a good... So anyway, the only thing I don't like about... See how that's just a residue? The only thing I don't like about this pool chlorine, if you want, muriatic acid, is that it changes, it oxidizes the metal and it makes it go green. I hate it. It drives me crazy. So you want to wash this really, really good. Soap and water, scrub the heck out of it. Okay. And that's all I can think of. So yeah, I think you're good. You'll be good for a quiz. Just you want to know how to solder anyway, and you want to be ready to take that quiz. If you pass the quiz, I know you watched this and you learned everything, and you're good.